Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode of the award winning Everything Compliance. Today, we have the full gang: Jonathan Armstrong, Karen Moore, Matt Kelly, Karen Woody, and Jonathan Marks. Since this is being recorded after November 5th, we're going to talk about the election, what it might mean for compliance, as well as some other topics. So, with that, Matt, you have already blogged on this. Where do you think compliance stands or should be standing and thinking about as of today?
I did write about this when I think I woke up around 3 a.m. Wednesday morning, and I had already sensed that Trump was probably going to pull this off. Sure enough, he did, and typed out some initial thoughts. And I've spent most of the week talking to compliance officers here and there about what they think. And I wanted to cover, I think, three big points that jump out to me right away. First, I have not done an official poll on this, but I suspect most compliance officers are dismayed that Donald Trump is in charge for multiple reasons. But more than anything else, I think a lot of people were just dispirited because we should acknowledge that Donald Trump is not a good man. He is venal in the sort of moral sense. I personally think he's pretty stupid and not that, just doesn't grasp a lot of nuances of complex issues. He is a lawbreaker. He's been accused of violating the FCPA. He is a convicted felon. He has been found liable for sexual assault. And a lot of people are just wondering, how are we supposed to support an ethics and compliance culture when that man is at the top of our society? And voters put him in, which they did. So are they really saying that they don't care about ethics and compliance and good conduct in the same way that Trump clearly does not care about ethics and compliance? There was this existential angst. And that's the thing I wanted to talk about first. There was one person, a senior audit executive at a company, and he said this to me. I'll read out his comment. Here's what I think about what the average American thinks about compliance. They don't care. They don't care how corporations are run. They don't care that corporate executives are dishonest. They don't care about business rules. They think how Trump runs his business. Think about Musk as a corporate leader. That's our future. Now, with all due respect to my internal audit guy, I disagree with him, where he says people don't care about ethics and compliance. I think it is more the case that people grumble about the need for ethics and compliance, and they say they don't like it right up until the thing happens, whether that is your boss harassing you, or your 401k got wiped out because of accounting fraud, or any number of other things might happen. You don't have a hospital procedure because the hospital fell victim to a ransomware attack and had to reschedule its procedures for 6 weeks. People tend to care about compliance and ethics then. They're always asking, how the F did this happen? I was there in 2008 when the economy crashed. A lot of people cared about ethics then. So really, I think that my friend is conflating why people voted for Donald Trump with whom he is. And maybe that involves some political analysis and social analysis that is beyond the scope of everything compliance. But I personally don't think that people looked at Donald Trump, the person, and said, that's the guy I want to emulate. That's who I think is great. And he is a good, noble Christian, and I want to follow him. They looked around and said, my life sucks. I don't like the system. Harris is part of the system. So I'm going to vote against the system. And I guess that means Trump. But because I think that his venality is incidental to his victory, not a driving force to it. And honestly, at the end of the day, companies are still going to do lots of bad things, and people are still going to complain about it and still demand that companies shouldn't have done those things. And I don't know exactly what it'll mean for regulatory enforcement, although I'll get to a second point on that in a moment. But people still will want to feel like they have some measure of recourse when they are aggrieved. And if there's anything Americans are good at, it's feeling aggrieved. So I just want to say that for the the existentialist angst here, why are we even doing this? Because despite what people did 2 or 3 days ago, they actually do want to work at ethical companies. They do like obeying the law. They don't like lawbreakers. For whatever reason, a majority of them decided the exigencies of the moment necessitate that we put a lawbreaker and a venal person into office anyways. We can talk about that some other time. But the existential angst, I'm not there on it. Conversation number two I had was a bit more specific with a compliance officer, where I asked this person, what about FCPA enforcement? Because it's no secret, Donald Trump does not like the FCPA. As I've said before, he is suspected of violating the FCPA when he built a hotel in Azerbaijan back 10 or 15 years ago. He has promised before that he would want to do a big number on the FCPA. He never did. Neither did the Republicans in Congress. I don't know that they're actually going to try that again. But all of that said, when I asked this compliance officer, what do you think about FCPA enforcement? His response was, and again, I'll quote you because I have another post going up about this in a few minutes. Oh, I don't think the FCPA is going away. And even if it did, it's not like my company could forget about the FCPA compliance anyways. Okay, why did he say that? And I think he touched on three good things. A, the FCPA is a moneymaker for the federal government. They like making that money. They like the revenue that it can bring in. The Justice Department itself, the prosecutors there, they like having FCPA as a career track. How many of them come in from the private sector or they come up as an AUSA, they become a federal prosecutor for a while, then they go to the private sector, they bill out 2,500 an hour to help you with an FCPA investigation. I'm not saying that this is a racket. That's not what I mean, because I think fighting corruption is a good thing. But still, there is a lot of incentive for the Justice Department to keep doing this. I am no fool. I am not naive. I do realize that there occasionally will be CEOs who say, I don't care that we got the FCPA thing. I'm just going to give Trump 5 million to the charity of his choice, charity, quote unquote. And then he's going to make that case go away. Is that going to happen? Yeah, probably. Is it gonna happen at scale? I don't think so. I don't think Trump is interested enough in that. So I think that Trump will have episodes of corruption in his government and probably within his office. But as I said before, I don't think that his corruption is going to be scalable and sustainable like that, frankly, because I don't think he's gonna be that interested in it. If he could make a couple of bucks by doing this, sure. But don't forget, this man is 78. He's not in good health. He spends most of his day watching TV. I don't think he's going to be that invested in trying to gut the FCPA. He's going to be invested in saying it and in saying a lot of things, but I don't know that he's going to be that invested in the doing of it. A lot of people will still be invested in having a viable FCPA enforcement program, possibly even including Trump, so we can open investigations about people he doesn't like or who don't give him the big shakedown graft and kickbacks. And then the last point about FCPA, my compliance officer who talked about all this, he is a British company with a large US presence, but they also do business around the world. It's like, I got the UK Bribery Act. I got other anti corruption statutes. I take government contracts. There is no way I can just dismantle my internal controls for anti corruption, regardless of what Trump and his Justice Department minions may or may not do about FCPA enforcement. I need to have these capabilities in place. And my CEO and my general counsel do know that. And I think that was a very good point. Last big thing that I'll say, the last conversation I had with the compliance officer, we were questioning what is the role of Elon Musk in this future administration? Because Musk had said that he's going to be in charge of some department of governmental efficiency. There's a certain richness that to be more efficient, the first thing we're going to do is create new bureaucracy. But okay, whatever. Let's assume that he does that. And then he is going to march around the federal government, gutting personnel, gutting programs, gutting spending. And has anybody given any thought to all the other Trump loyalists who are going to be around who actually want a job too? Because here's an example of what I mean. Let's look at the Securities and Exchange Commission. One leading person to potentially be a chairman under Trump is Dan Gallagher, former Republican commissioner during the Obama years, these days, chief legal and compliance officer at Robinhood. I've known Gallagher for 10 years, not well, but he and I have exchanged emails and comments. Good guy, thoughtful guy, reasonable Republican SEC chair as these things go. And he's going to take that job and then try and run the SEC while Elon Musk mucks around in his organization and says, I'm going to cut 3/4 of your staff. And how is that going to work? And I think that we should remember the hallmarks of the first Trump administration were chaos and incoherence more than fascism. I suspect we're going to see a lot of that again. And just because they might be better at knowing what they want to do, that doesn't mean that they're any smarter or more skilled in the doing of it. These are people led by someone who is not terribly engaged, not very energetic, and not very smart. And I think that is going to be a reflection of a lot of dysfunction in this administration. So when we wonder, what is the SEC going to do? What, say you're in healthcare, what is Robert Kennedy Jr. going to do with healthcare reform? And he's going to try and gut the FDA or do this, that, or the other thing. How is the Department of Health and Human Services secretary going to feel about that? Maybe he will actually be HHS secretary. I don't know. But we are going to have a cast of characters who are parading around the government, trying to do this, that, and the other thing, and interfering with people doing their real job. And even if you disagree with them doing their real job, the chaos is still going to be the defining characteristic. And that is going to be a point compliance officers should think about, because when the SC is burning down around its ears, thanks to Musk in feuds with Gallagher or whoever or what's going on, those are the people at the other end of the phone when you have an incident you're trying to resolve. So we wonder a lot about how is that going to work over the next 4 years. That's me on my soapbox. I will now get off and let other people do their thing.
Mr. Marks, you're off first.
So basically, we're using tone from the top as a punchline now, because if that's kind of what this is going to turn into, then I'm just curious as to how it all eventually does play out. I mean, everything that you said certainly resonates with me. I understand it, and I realize that most companies live in a global type of environment, because of the way supply chains work and things like that. And that makes perfect sense to me. But if I'm looking at the leader in chief of the free world here, and I'm doing something and I realize that I'm really dealing with someone that really just doesn't care about any of this, because they're riddled with behavior that is indicative of overriding, circumventing, or ignoring types of rules, regulations, or controls, then I'm going to guarantee that's got to trickle down through the rest of the structure and the rest of the attitudes that people will have. And so I think it's a pretty dangerous proposition, Matt. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because to me, I mean, I do think now telling from the top it really is just a punchline.
I mean, it certainly is a punchline in the Trump administration, as it was the first time around, and it will be again. But I still do fundamentally think that, most people actually do want to be ethical and play by the rules, including most CEOs who are at the top. I think of it this way, is that the best sales executives I know, they despise the idea of cheating or bribing to win a business contract, because that implies that they are not good enough to vanquish their competitors in fair contest. And they take exceptional offense when I say you're just going to bribe your way to do it. Now, there are executives there who might feel they have no choice and I'm going to have to do this. That's a fault of senior management for not giving you the room to have more choices. There are also a handful of executives I've seen who actually they say, "No, I got no problem with bribing people and fixing contracts. I think that's fine." And Tom, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
No.
All right. Then these people who behave like that way, we all know them, and universally, they're a-holes, and nobody likes them at the end of the day. And most times, I've seen them all get hoisted on their own petard when they get run off on some other sort of fraud that blows up in their face. But we have to remember that Trump is one of those executives, but most people do think he is an unpleasant character. He never had favorable approval ratings when he was president. I don't suspect he's going to have them now. Why would he have them now? Because every other elected official who has ousted an incumbent this year, whether that is Keir Starmer and Mr. Armstrong, you can chime in, but everybody else, they all get into office and then they all get unpopular too. So why is Trump going to be any different? He wasn't popular the first time. There's a lot of big factors and influences at play that means he's probably not going to be popular now. And I think that's just reflective of people who are a-holes ultimately aren't that popular. And I don't know that I have a better answer for you right now, Jonathan Marks. I'll think about it more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I guess the other thing that I keep thinking about is that we've worked so hard, many of us, to make sure that we've implemented at least fundamental frameworks and sound governance principles and controls and things like that over the years. I would hate for a board or some board that kind of gloms onto all this thinking that we can now relax a little bit. You can't relax a little bit.
Mhm.
You can't. You have to keep your foot down. There has to be forward momentum. It just can't be momentum for the
Well,
sake of momentum. And
it,
that's my bigger fear.
it's a question of what is the risk tolerance the company wants to take and how much do they want to take their foot off the board or off the pedal. Like, I think artificial intelligence would be a great one, a great example here. You want to go in and embrace AI without any sound governance at all, knock yourself out. I'm willing to bet it's going to blow up in your face. You want to go into global business without any internal accounting controls. I suppose maybe we can't stop you anymore, and Trump wouldn't see that there's anything wrong with that. Neither did Bernie Ebers at WorldCom. Where is WorldCom now? Where did Bernie Ebers go? Prison. Like, these relaxations, you can have some recalibration of risk tolerance, but that is not the same as saying, F it, man, I can just have all the risk I want. Sooner or later, then the inevitable will eventually happen. And I think that's case in point. And I do actually think that when Donald Trump comes into office, I think his administration is going to be terrible because he doesn't know what he wants to do. He doesn't really care what he wants to do, and his plans are incoherent. And I think most people who voted for him are in for a rude awakening. And then, like, much like the first term, which turned out to be in the end a disaster. And you're like, folks, what do you think's going to happen now?
And I think from a regulatory point of view as well, there's no sense in relaxing your controls on the basis of now. Investigations are never real time. I'm doing one at the moment. It's conducting 2018, 2019. That's relatively quick. Oftentimes you're investigating conduct 7, 8, 9 years ago, particularly if it's with the authorities. I think it was probably about podcast 15 when Tom said, compliance is always viewed in the rear view mirror. And I think that's definitely right. You're dumb if you bet on the current administration, even if Trump turns out to be the best president ever. He's only going to do one term unless he alters those rules as well. People like Elon Musk, though, are they one night stands or marriages? When you've got two egotists in the same room, neither of them get to talk about their favorite topic exclusively. So they're not going to last very long together, are they? And a lot of these recent converts to Trumpism, they sort of obviously never happened to me, but the last available person at the last dance of the school disco.
I do think that Elon is too mercurial of a person to last very long with Donald Trump. And not only that, but he clearly wants to take over the world. He's already done this now. He's going to move on to other things too. Do they like the idea of sitting around and barking orders and then things magically happen? Sure. But, the hard work of actually doing policy development and administration, Trump doesn't want to do that. He didn't do it before. Musk doesn't want to do that. He's never done it. He acquired Twitter, ran it into the toilet. When Tesla finally ran into some really difficult problems a few years ago, he never had a good idea for it. And remember, he did not found Tesla. He did not start PayPal. He did not start Twitter. All of these businesses he blew in. Occasionally he was lucky and he made a killing. That's why he is the richest man in the world. But I still fundamentally, he's a reckless person. And ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a falling out between Trump and Musk, because to your point, Jonathan, when you have two egoists in the room, they can't talk about their favorite subject. And so, yeah.
Okay, why don't we move on? Karen Moore, what has been on your mind that you could share with us today?
I would like to continue to bang my drum about companies keeping to their core values and re-examining them on a constant basis. And I don't think there's any more important time to do that when you're facing a tremendous sea of uncertainty. And I've got faith in companies. I've worked in 4 different global organizations. And I think fundamentally, while deeply flawed, they also do strive to do things with integrity and try and achieve gains the right way for the most part. Now, are there going to be some companies that are out there going, yes, we get to go do whatever we want? Probably, maybe. I don't think it's as easy as some of deregulation and changing enforcement might suggest. The world is more complicated than that now. I think, Matt, as you pointed out with the FCPA, while maybe stepping back FCPA scope and enforcement 10 years ago might have led to more instances of bribery. It's a much more complex environment out there. And if you're not going to get caught by US regulators, you'll just get caught by other regulators in the UK and Brazil and Singapore, places where we're seeing stepped up legislation and enforcement as well. So I don't think there's a free pass out there. That whole concept of the FCPA is creating an unlevel playing field for American companies doesn't really hold sway nearly as much as it did at its inception. I also think the strengthened whistleblower incentives and culture, not just here, but abroad, means that companies are not going to get away with things in the way they might think they might. There's a kind of political pressure and appointments within the DOJ. So I'm not really sure that we've got this big group of companies who are sitting there waiting for deregulation, waiting for enforcement shifts, waiting for political changes, just jumping at the chance to do bad. So I've got faith in corporate compliance programs. I've got faith in companies. I just want them to listen to the right voices, to continue to look at their core values and to continue to listen to their key stakeholders. And those key stakeholders, I would argue, the ones that should come first are their customers and their employees, and not the politicians and the regulators. And what are those customers and those employees saying despite all the noise around you? And I think even pre-election, we saw in the DEI space a very loud voice in Robbie Starbuck trying to get companies to roll back their DEI, ESG, and other woke commitments. He's actually created a trophy wall of the statements of companies that have rolled back because of this sort of political loud voice pressure that he's put on. But what's happened with a lot of those companies, customers and employees are saying, that doesn't represent our views. Why are you listening to that guy when these things are either really important to us or not so unimportant that we want you to change your strategy? So keeping those commitments in the face of loud voices, in the face of bullies, in the face of foxes running the hen house, because let's remember, when foxes run the hen house, there's great feasting and enjoyment for a while, but then there's a bunch of dead chicken. There's no new chicks being born to sustain the business. There are no eggs being produced to sell. So staying the course, I think, has got to be the really big message there. And that's got to come with some help. I personally believe that compliance now has a tremendous opportunity to stop the flag waving by companies on all these good things we're doing that are now going to become bad words: sustainability and environmental responsibility and diversity, and to do the real work to tell a company, these are still important to us. Let's take a look at what the company is doing on all these things rather than what it feels it needed to say about these things, and resist the temptation to like swing the other direction and say the opposite of what they were saying before. I do think that there's a big risk that control functions get less funding than they need. I think they need more funding now than ever. That audit and compliance and other functions like HR really need to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work. That supply chain becomes really tossed into turmoil with all this talk about tariffs. I think there's going to be a lot of blowback on that. Remember, if we put 100% tariff on Mexico, they're just going to turn around and put 100% tariff on us. And I think my old stomping ground, the U.S. Court of International Trade, is going to be seeing more and more customs cases as well as anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases as a result, because there isn't a whole lot of logic here. I think that companies are going to be scrambling to deal with tax changes and supply chain uncertainty, dealing with crypto and blockchain. So there's a lot of different focus and emphasis, but it should all always be driven by who are we as a company. I think now that if you're not going to have regulation, then the whole kind of integrity component becomes stronger. It's not we're doing what we must do, but we're going to do what we should do. So again, I think a opportunity for compliance to be a loud voice there. And I think as trust in government institutions becomes more and more fractured and the lines between our three branches of government become more blurred, which is the thing that keeps me up at night the most, because I'm just so much faith in our democracy resting on checks and balances. I think that corporations have an opportunity to step up and be the entities that people trust the most, but they're only going to do that if they stay the course. So I've written so many notes here. I'm trying to organize my thoughts, but I do think it comes really right down to that. And Jonathan, I 100% support what you said and both Jonathans really, which is that life is long, especially in corporate action. And we're just going to have to weather the 4 years and hope that the damage done is reparable at some point.
I do recall Trump being a Bitcoin pioneer himself. I think I had a look at it and it traced the Trump Bitcoin operations, as I recall, traced back to a vape shop in Utah. So I wonder if the Federal Reserve will move to share locations with that vape shop. Who knows?
Karen Woody, that seems like a great entree to what I wanted to you to maybe talk to us about, some of your initial thoughts, and that is the SEC. Matt touched on it in his remarks. We have several, I think, very qualified candidates to potentially lead the SEC, but with Elon Musk hovering around, where do you see SEC enforcement or regulation?
It's a great question. I think you're right. I'm going to pick up a little bit where Matt left off, and to some extent, Karen as well. First and first, Gary Gensler will be gone, if not by the end of this month, and certainly before January. It's more customary, I think, for him to resign as opposed to being fired, but Trump has promised that would be the day one act if he's somehow still in the chair role at that time. So we're in a post-Gensler space, inevitably, in the next few weeks. And so what that will mean, I think, I guess to your point, the first question is who will then take the chair? Dan Gallagher is obviously one name that's floated a lot. And then I think to Matt's point, he is sort of a somewhat sane centrist. I mean, right. But, he has a lot of thoughts about crypto. He's at Robinhood. So we're going to see a boom, I think, in deregulation of crypto, SEC standing down on that space. I think we're going to see a huge, that's going to be a little bit scary. I think that's going to be a really, it was already the Wild West in some ways. I think that's going to be even more sort of an interesting place to be. But Dan Gallagher sort of seems a little bit like a bit of the old guard. He's pre-Trump sort of Republican commissioner. Another name that is, I think, very viable is the elevation of Hester Peirce up to chair. She's one of the Republican commissioners now and very well known, very vocal, young woman. Like, I think she has certainly made a name for herself on the commission. So I wouldn't be surprised if she also gets, her name is in the ring a lot. And then substantively, where we're going to be with this agency, I did see someone throw out there might not be an SEC in a Trump world at some point. I agree with Matt that I don't think we're going to go that far, but I mean, there's some that are just beyond low hanging fruit. Like they're already died and rotten fruit. That's climate change rules. That's going to be any push on internal controls, any sort of the aggressive tax the SEC has taken with a little more latitude, with a little more strategy. All of those things are gone. Like I think, like I said, crypto, climate, all of the ESG diversity measures gone. I mean, don't even bring that up. I think to Karen's point, that's going to be seen as a bad word at this point. And it already was targeted before now, but now I think we're going to see just decimation of those concepts. And so I don't know where that gets us. I think if we take a 30,000 foot view and think about the 90 years that this institution has been around, one of the things it's supposed to do is to protect investors, to maintain fair and efficient markets, and to facilitate capital formation. And if it just becomes a complete, hold on, I find the word that's a PG word here, disaster, then capital will exit. It will go to other markets, but potentially people will lose, investors will lose protections. And soon people won't be happy with that. I mean, it's sort of, I think, the theme that both Matt and Karen have alluded to already, which is soon the foxes get fat and everyone else gets mad and things go wrong. There is a WorldCom. There is a 2008. It might be a lot of fun right now, but there has to be some guardrails at some point. Otherwise, people will lose a lot of money and it won't work. Those are my initial thoughts about where we will be. I don't have any idea what role Elon will play. Elon very much does not like that agency. He does not like the SEC. He's tangled with them often. He's brought every possible claim he can to fight the attempts the SEC has made to rein him in his own corporate affairs. But so I don't know if we give Elon a lot more power over that, I can imagine he would be the first one to say we don't even need this agency at all. But we shall see. Um, those are my initial thoughts, but I'm happy to defer to the crew.
Matt, you want to start off with a question or comment?
First comment, I think, Karen Woody, one possible adjective that's PG for this podcast might be feckless, if that's where the SEC winds up going on enforcement. I am intrigued by the idea of Hester Peirce becoming SEC chair because she is the resident libertarian theorist at the SEC and has been for a while on pretty much any issue. You could just pick any random thing and say, what would Hester Peirce say about it? It's easy to predict what she's going to say about pretty much everything because she's so doctrinaire about libertarian approaches to this, that, and the other thing. My questions would be, what will the SEC do around cybersecurity disclosures? Because that was one thing, even in the Trump administration, where the then chairman, Jay Clayton, said, this is a big issue. We can't ignore it. We have to regulate cybersecurity somehow. And then the SEC under Gary Gensler took it farther. And now there's required disclosure of major cyber incidents. And it's the sort of thing where I think the rubber meets the road, that it's easy to say, let's deregulate this, that, or the other thing. But if a company experiences a major cybersecurity failure and nobody knew ahead of time, that might be a thing, or they're lying about the size of it, how does that help anybody? And how does deregulation of that serve any purpose? And it's the sort of thing where suddenly voters will be saying, that's not what we meant when we said, let's put Trump back in office. We don't totally want to get screwed all over again. Tom, I don't know if that counts as PG or not. But those are the kind of issues that I do struggle with. And certainly on accounting in internal controls, like Gensler was trying to turn every single issue into an internal accounting controls failure, and that's going to go away. But the risk doesn't care if it's regulated or not. So if they don't regulate it and the risk just kind of lurks around and runs around the world and blows up somewhere else and everybody gets caught in the shrapnel in the capital markets, like, people are going to be upset. And those are the kind of things I wonder about. How are they going to fit reality to their right-wing doctrinaire views?
Yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk thought to that, I think you're exactly right. And this is where I was going. At some point, there's a reason that everyone, I think, can get behind some amount of regulation. Hopefully, like we all hope that there's not botulism in our milk too. I mean, there's going to be a lot that we're going to start to be like, wait, we actually realize that was a good idea. It's nice to not have polio right now. Like, I mean, all this is going to be where we might be headed. I mean, my knee-jerk reaction, however, is that Elon might say, I can do that. Cybersecurity, like, give me the contract. This might become hyper privatized and more power and oversight by just the few in some ways, as opposed to a government institution. I don't know. We'll see.
I would say, above all, whatever Elon is going to propose getting rid of, he will somehow convert it to, let's privatize it. And by the way, my company can do that. This is, first and foremost, a self-enrichment scheme by Elon to be able to bill the taxpayer so he can get even richer. That's all it is when he talks about this.
So, Karen, I have a question for you. In areas such as ESG or DEI, which businesses want to either have or do business with other companies who have proposals, banks, financial institutions, investment houses, and others who have the keys to the money, when they want to have those programs in place, do you think the SEC will actively, if not discourage that, actually go the other way and say that cannot be a part of your assessment of a public company?
I mean, that's a great question. I think we're already there. I don't know if the Trump administration necessarily is going to, I mean, Trump administration means they've won that. They already were challenging that and making those claims, but now we don't have the fight. I do, like I said, I hope maybe there is some answer in private ordering. Maybe Karen's point of like, this is where corporations can step up. Like maybe we do have the Patagonias of the world that hold us to some higher standard that's not required. And the regulations, the floor, maybe we can have companies aspire to something higher than that. And so I, I don't know. I mean, I think if the SEC is doing anything, like I said, we don't even need Eugene Scalia challenging every single provision of Dodd-Frank as a career anymore. I mean, he doesn't even have to bother. I mean, he gets to win before he even brings the case. So I think it'll be just real lack of action that the SEC doesn't feel that they could pass more rules, have additional regulation, have any sort of authority from Congress, which again, we already saw in the last term from the court. I mean, to Karen's point about where are the other checks and balances, we already saw a massive push against the administrative state writ large in this last. So it does feel like it's all gas, no brakes in the wrong direction on this one.
Well, that cheery note, I was going to ask for Mr. Marks, but are you still with us, Jonathan?
He logged off for a bit.
Then let's go to the other Jonathan, Mr. Armstrong. What are your initial observations?
Yeah, thanks very much. I thought I'd take it from the sort of the high level view, maybe not space orbit, and then look again at some of the compliance effects that I see. And I've been on, I suppose, a mini world tour really in the past couple of weeks. And obviously I've been places where stuff like this really just does matter. I was in North Korea a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, there are loads of implications for what Trump may or may not do in North Korea. I mean, to state the obvious, with North Korea, there was this buddying system people will recall there in the past that led to Trump in 2008 asking South Korea effectively for dollars to still have US military bases on South Korean soil. So clearly there were some worried people in Korea about the elections. And obviously that's even more the case now that there seems to be close to 1,000 North Korean soldiers in or around Ukraine. I think I was also in Denmark last week where there were similar concerns as well. Obviously, the Nordics and places like Estonia are very concerned about potential Russian aggression on their borders as well. Somebody I know and trust said that if they were to take a vote in Denmark, Trump versus Harris, he thought it would be 98% Harris. So there's certainly not much confidence at all that Trump can stand up to Russian aggression. And obviously that matters more in Europe because of the political situation in Germany, which is very flimsy at the moment. The coalition, as you might know, recently collapsed, and the US are the biggest funder of the Ukrainian defense efforts, and Germany's number 2. So there are real issues, I think, for the Zelensky government, where even if Trump offers unequivocal support, that sort of, we'll assume that the Biden administration is going to run down, and that gives aggressors like Putin a bit of a window to exploit the uncertainty. So I think there's real issues on a sort of world basis. I think turning back to the UK politically, there are some problems potentially for the Starmer administration. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, famously called Trump a tyrant in a toupee. And it's fair to say that some of his previous comments about Trump have been less than flattering. Both Lammy and Starmer went and had dinner with Trump a couple of weeks ago. Lammy says if Trump knew, he'd forgotten about it. And actually, he offered me a second piece of chicken. So that proves that all of these things have been forgotten. I'm not sure of the chicken test. I'm not sure if that's a test in world diplomacy, but I'll defer to the Home Secretary on that. But there are clearly problems for the Starmer administration where the Trump team lodged a complaint of alleged election interference by the Labour Party on behalf of Kamala Harris. I'm not sure where that complaint stands at the moment. And if Musk gets into the new administration, even if only for a short space of time, I think that adds to problems as well. Musk almost certainly incited, condoned, or encouraged hate crime over X during the UK riots. Many of those rioters were convicted. Some of them had their tweets promoted by Musk and his organization. So I think that adds difficulties as well. Then maybe turning to the compliance agenda, I agree with Karen. I think that tariffs are clearly likely to be an area of conflict. Trade lawyers, I imagine, are getting very excited, are clearing their holidays and getting their billing pencils ready. I think it'll impact on things like export controls, etc. So if you're a fan of French cheese or Polish sausage or Danish pastries, eat to your heart's content this weekend, because it may be more problematical, I guess, in the new year. I agree with Matt about issues like cybersecurity being in play. But the thing that I'm really interested in is Lockton did a survey, I think a week or so ago, about ransomware attack, where the requests for ransoms are at an all-time high. But I think percentage-wise, there's a drop in payments, and that's lower than it has been for some time. I think one of the reasons for that will be sanctions, and the fact that the US and the UK have sanctioned ransomware threat actors. When I speak to boards who have ransom demands, as a general rule, many boards are still willing to pay ransoms. When you talk to them about potential sanctions liability, about the fact that attribution is really difficult, about the fact that crypto mixers have been sanctioned as well, about the fact that some end destination banks may be in Russia and they may be sanctioned. That's what tends to get the board's attention. I think they're not too bothered, or some boards aren't too bothered about paying criminals, but they don't really want the sanctions downside. So if the new Trump administration takes its foot off the sanctions pedal, then I think there are real issues for cybersecurity there, as well as other sanctions issues. And maybe I'll just give two more. I think as far as data transfer is concerned, that whole debate with the Schrems cases, Privacy Shield being dead, being replaced by the data protection framework. Well, I think Trump's had a bit of luck here, I suspect, in that the review was completed, I think, 2 or 3 days prior to the election. So the new scheme is now safe. However, there's a potential bear pit. The EDPB, the sort of coordination board of data privacy across the EU, recommended a 3-year review rather than a 4-year review of DPF. So if the Trump administration doesn't do stuff that could come back to haunt them, obviously a lot of the DPF deal is supported by executive orders. So Trump will have to maintain the executive orders put in place by the Biden administration. And so I think there are potential problems there as well. And maybe the last area of potential conflict off the top of my head is AI. Musk is some would say, serial offender in terms of AI as well. There was a spat in Europe with him using Twitter, I refuse to call it X, data as training data without people's consent. And the last I saw, he seems to have given in to the regulators on that and made some differentiation between EU and non-EU use of Twitter data to train Grok or whatever it's called. But that, I think, could be a big area of conflict as well. Don't forget that the provisions of the EU AI Act start to come in February. That'll be shortly after the new administration gets into full flow. So that could be an earlier area of conflict, I suspect. And I think what normally does with these things is bad news for American corporations. Perceive that the sins of one are the sins of many. So if I'm a US corporation looking at the potential risks with a incoming Trump administration that includes Musk particularly, then I'd want to make sure I'd really done a thorough review of the EU AI Act to see what sort of compliance measures I have to put in place in January in case that is an element of the trade war as well. And I think the last thing to say is trade wars are not just now about bananas and pineapples and cashmere jumpers and whiskey. There are all sorts of soft trade wars as well. I think GDPR enforcement is one of them. EU AI Act enforcement is likely to be another one of those. So I think that there are potential bear pits for US corporations particularly, and they might want to look at their agenda with the potential of how the UK or the EU or Korea might react.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Armstrong? All right. Jay Marks, you are back with us.
Well, good.
You're batting in number 5, but the cleanup position today, you want to sum up where we are? You got some other thoughts for us?
No, I'm not that smart, so I'll let you all hang with all the political stuff, but I wanted to come back to earth a little bit. So politics is not my thing. So I wanted to talk some more about maybe some audits and NOCAR and how that's kind of meandering its way through the atmosphere today. And NOCAR stands for non-compliance with laws and regulations. So it does fit in a little bit, and it is sort of adjacent to all of this that we're talking about. So I think it would be a good topic for today. And since we've never really spoken about it, maybe I could just give the audience a brief overview of what that really is. So there have been some changes by the PCAOB that have been put forth, and NOCAR is one of them. And to break it down, the proposed changes really require auditors to now identify laws and regulations relevant to financial statements, assess and respond to risks of material misstatements due to noncompliance, and flag and communicate any information indicating potential noncompliance or fraud. And if we stop and we think about that for a moment, that's really not the role of the traditional auditor. So, and we all know that traditionally auditors aren't required to detect illegal acts beyond financial misstatements, but under NOCAR, they need to make or take a much deeper dive into its non-financial areas like environmental regulations, workplace safety, and global compliance issues such as data privacy and anti-bribery laws, all things that we keep talking about on a regular ongoing basis. So this shift really means that audits will require expertise outside traditional accounting, creating a key role for fraud and forensic professionals. Yay! Once again, the Full Employment Act, as with Sarbanes-Oxley and internal auditors and controls people, now we have the Full Employment Act for forensic professionals like myself. It's caused a little bit of consternation for a bunch of different reasons. We all know that auditors have been under the gun for a long time. We all know the pressures that are being put on them. We all know the financial aspects of all this and how that comes into play. We all know that a lot of the firms have been moving more towards, I won't say fixing what's broken, but trying to react to sort of the changing landscape that audits and those challenges that present themselves bring to these types of engagements. So what I did in sort of preparation for today, I went around and kind of looked at what everybody was really saying about this. It is pretty serious, and it is going to, it more likely than not going to really shift the focus a little bit. But one of the big 4 firms said these are going to be operational challenges. One of the big 4 says it's going to be a burden on audit teams. Another one said it might increase scrutiny on auditors. I know this isn't really one of those bad words, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I know that's not really a bad word, but it's certainly something increased scrutiny. Of course it will. And then other things are, like I said, the auditors might need to assess areas traditionally beyond financial statements, not really what they're trained to do. So it's going to be really interesting. So going back to the fraud and forensic professionals and their emerging role here, it's going to be interesting to see how and if they utilize us. I've been for a very long time a big proponent of working with the auditors. And for most part, I've had really great experiences with them when they come to me and they start talking about fraud risks and compliance risks and things that we should be doing from an audit planning perspective, where they have an issue with regards to one key risk area and how do we attack this, and working hand in glove with them. I think that's really going to expand. And again, I have a couple of colleagues out there. I hope you're listening today, but this has sort of been our silent plight for a long time, is to really be part of all of that and not just sort of be an also ran when stuff really does go bad, or the proverbial what hits the fan. I can't say that's a brain bad word, so I can't say that, but I think you all get that. So, but I wanted to focus back on, like, implementing these changes is not going to be easy, especially for smaller firms. They may find it challenging to expand their scope on certain things, particularly in these non-financial and compliance areas, because again, that's not what they're built for. So we, as forensic professionals, can definitely bridge the gap and kind of help these small teams handle these complexities of NOCAR by offering these specialized expertise. And again, another part of this, I think, is really technology. There is a really big component of technology driven solutions. And so that's all going to really kind of come into play here. And this all shouldn't be a shock to anyone, because kind of what's going on over here is the same thing that's sort of control adjacent over here from an internal perspective, as it relates to compliance programs and what the expectations are from companies to be doing already. So it's kind of, I think that we're kind of catching up on the audit side to what's really going on the right side over here. But it will change how companies approach compliance and risk management for sure. So it's going to be pushing the audit industry to take a proactive stance on compliance issues and fraud detection, which again, it's not like they haven't done that in the past. I think it's just going to really just crank this up. And I think it's necessary. I really do, especially in today's risk landscape. I do think it's going to be, like some of the other firms have said, it's going to be operationally, it's going to be a little bit of a change. It's going to be a little bit of change of thought and thinking. May really go back to some training that really needs to be looked at and revamped. But I think overall, most of the folks that I've talked to that are in the audit space and have been doing this for a long time recognize that this was probably going to come at one point, and now we're here. So it's going to be interesting to see what really does happen and how they utilize us old folks to really help them really manage these fraud type risks or these compliance type risks going forward. But stay tuned, more to come on this for sure.
Looks like we are on to fan favorites, shout outs, and rants. With our tradition, we'll keep the same order. So Matt Kelly, Karen Moore, Karen Woody, Jonathan Armstrong, Jonathan Marks, and then myself. Matt, you have a shout out and or rant for us today?
I do have a shout out. I will keep it bipartisan. I want to give a shout out to two elected officials in this country who have done the right thing and are still persevering and sticking around, and we should give shout outs to them both. The first one is David Vallado, who is a Republican congressman from California. He is one of the 10 Republicans who voted in the House to impeach Donald Trump after the January 6th insurrection. Trump has then made it a personal pledge to try and oust all of the 10 Republicans who did vote to impeach him. Vallado is one of two who are still around on the Republican side. The other one is a congressman from, I believe, Washington, who his election is still too close to call. However, Vallado is going to win, and he is now stuck through and persevered two times that Trump has tried to take him out. And the other congressman I want to support or shout out to is a Democrat, is actually Congressman-elect Gene Vindman. If that name rings a bell, that's because he is the twin brother of Alex Vindman, and both of them were instrumental in the first impeachment. And indeed, Gene Vindman was the whistleblower in the first Trump impeachment, where Trump was trying to shake down President Zelensky to launch an investigation into Joe Biden on bogus terms. Vindman has suffered many outrageous slings and arrows since then from Republicans. However, he ran a very tough, close race in the Virginia 7th District to succeed another congressman who had retired. It was an open seat, and he won. So good to see that some people will still believe in the right thing and be able to persevere and be rewarded by the people for it. Didn't necessarily make that choice with the presidency, but at least in these two districts, people did make the right choice then. So I'll take what I can get these days.
Karen Moore, do you have a shout out and or rant for us today?
Yes, I do. And one of the positive byproducts of the mess that we're in right now is you just need to focus on joy and beauty in the world. So it kind of helps you refocus. So I'm going to stop my ranting about parking lots and all sorts. And it was really a big toss up. I mean, I've gone on really long walks by the Potomac River. It's just stunning weather at the moment. I've been to the Impressionist exhibit at the National Gallery. Um, so a couple of other things that the Edinburgh Zoo has a baby pygmy hippo that they named Haggis and live webcam. I mean, that will de-stress you. I saw the news the other day that Jeff Vinnick, who's the owner of one of the NHL teams, the Lightnings, has decided to sell the team, but put $20 million into a bonus pot to distribute among its 300 full-time employees with a minimum payout of 50,000. They're good people in the world. They're cute baby animals. There's natural beauty. There's art. There's music. And it may be the winter of democracy in America at the moment, but it's also winter in Colorado. And ski season is started already. And one of the wonderful things about skiing, at least for me, is that while I'm concentrating, I'm not killing myself. I cannot think about anything else. And it's really nice and rest and fun. So my shout out is to just all the joy and beauty that exists.
Karen Woody, you have a very high bar to overcome.
I know. Mine was along the same lines here, which was going to be a shout out to all of the people on both sides of the aisle that participated as election monitors, pollsters, people that were working for at least 15 hours. I was there for only about 8 of them as an election observer. And it was such a thrill to see so many excited people come in and so many, I'm in Charlottesville Hills, so many people were voting for the first time. And so it was a beautiful day at that point of the day for realizing that this is a really sacred, incredible thing we have. Also, not to make this also a rant, or not even a rant, it's more of a dirge, I guess it is. But I will say, I guess I'll call it a preemptive shout out to the bravery that so many people will have to show and will show. I mean, I woke up this morning to an email from university president in the sleepy little town where I teach, saying that the LGBTQ research center had been vandalized and graffitied last night. So I think we are in for a very long, bumpy ride that's going to require a lot of bravery and a lot of allies being brave next to people who need a lot of support. So that's not the high note I wanted to land on, but I'll just echo Karen. You need to find the beauty and the joy where you can.
Mr. Armstrong.
I want to shout out to election ballot paper machine manufacturers. Now, I may have got this wrong, but I think that Fox News said in 2020 that none of those machines worked properly. And fast forward to 2024, every single machine worked properly. So they've gone from 0 compliance to 100% compliance in just 4 years. So I think we should give a big round of applause to all the gals and guys who've been working so hard over that 4 years to turn a disaster into a triumph.
Jonathan Marks.
Wow, that's tough. I do agree that for joy and peace and, in the world, life's too short and we have to find a way. And I'm glad that I'm spending my hour and a half with you folks today. So thanks for that. But my shout outs to my son, my middle son, Dan, who's 9-0, is a football coach for Cherry Hill East High School. They're playing tonight in a pretty big game. So I'm supporting him. And that's why I have the X's and O's up. And my rant in the same sports vein is to the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid. How can this guy play in the Olympics? And all of a sudden the NBA season comes around and he's sitting out. And I don't know about all of you, but when I go to a game and I spend all that money for a ticket, I expect those people to be there. And if they're not there, then I think the NBA should do something to make sure that those folks get some type of remuneration back. It's pathetic. It just is. It's absolutely pathetic. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with them. They really have been very quiet. They've been very quiet about it. I know the NBA is investigated, but something really needs to be done because at the end of the day, it's just a show. And if I'm going to a show, I don't want to see the understudies. I want to see the people that we come to pay for. And I think all the fans do as well. So shame on you, Philadelphia 76ers. Shame on you, Joel Embiid. And NBA, you need to step in. Silver, Adam, you need to step in here and do something that's really hurtful to them, that's going to make them realize that this stuff should just not happen. And it shouldn't happen on any team.
I'm going to shout out to the Indiana football team, who is currently 7-0 for the first time since 1967. If they win tomorrow, we're recording this on Friday, they will go to 8-0. Now, tomorrow they play the University of Michigan, my alma mater. In 2023, Michigan went 15-0 and Indiana went 3-9. Tomorrow, Michigan is a 2-touchdown underdog against the Hoosiers. Obviously, the world moves in strange and wondrous ways. But the question I'm going to leave you with is a shout out on everything compliance, akin to the Sports Illustrated jinx. Go Blue. All right. We made it through. No one's damaged or hurt themselves yet. So we will hopefully all feel better in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Tom.
thanks, Tom.